message to the ground saying that it was being powered down. Not a great prospect if your mission is to disappear without a trace. To truly vanish without leaving a trace, the captain would need to do something far more drastic. He would need to essentially pull the plug right out of the socket so that ACARS would go dark immediately without sending this telltale log-off message. To do this, Zahari reached up to the overhead panel and, using 2 fingers, turned off both engines' electrical generators. This instantly cut off the electrical supply to a whole host of aircraft systems, including the SATCOM, the satellite communication system which ACARS uses to send and receive its messages. Now, there was no way for anyone on the ground to receive it. to receive information from the plane. Just to be sure, he then went through the menu on his flight management computer and deselected the 2 ways by which ACARS can communicate with the ground: SATCOM and VHF radio. Now, even if SATCOM came back on, ACARS wouldn't be able to talk to the ground. As far as the outside world was concerned, it was at this spot over the South China Sea where MH370...
On commercial airlines like this, are some of these features needed? Do you need to like turn some of those off and on? Why do you have so much control over this on the commercial airline from the pilot spot?
Advantage.
Yeah, there is. Okay, fair enough then.
Disabling the SATCOM also had another benefit, which would be absolutely essential for the next step of the captain's plan.
Why would turn it off?
It meant that the satellite phone in the passenger cabin and the text message facility in the passengers' in-flight entertainment systems would no longer work. All lines of communication between Flight 370 and the outside world had been severed. To make assurance doubly sure, Zaharie then turned off the plane's external lights. Now, Flight 370 was fully invisible. All of this happened in the space of less than a minute. But these were only the first steps in Zaharie's grand plan. He had successfully hidden the aircraft from the people on the ground, but behind him, 238 people were expecting to be flown to Beijing. The first officer was making coffee, and he would be returning to the cockpit very shortly. To carry out his full plan, Zaharie would somehow need to incapacitate every single person on the aircraft.
He did it almost instantly.
And to that end, he had at his disposal a rather unconventional weapon: air. Or, more specifically, thin air. At 35,000 feet, there is only enough air to keep a human meaningfully conscious for about 45 seconds.
Yeah, like instant. Yeah,
but the air inside a passenger aircraft is pressurized. It's compacted, like the gas in a soft drink can. If the captain could somehow open a hole in his plane, most of this air would come rushing out. Luckily for him, he could open a hole. On the underside of the plane, there were 2 valves, aptly named outflow valves. By opening them, he could vent all of this condensed air out into the atmosphere. The captain readied himself. He reached into the panel on his left-hand side, pulled out his oxygen mask, placed it over his head, and started the flow of oxygen. Now that he had his own oxygen supply, he swung his right hand up to the overhead panel and prevented the engines from bringing new air into the cabin. Then, he pressed a switch which turned the aircraft's cabin pressurization from automatic to manual. Now he controlled the amount of air inside the aircraft's cabin. He had in his hands the air supply, the very lifeblood of all 238 people behind him. Once he carried out this next step, there would be no turning back. The next few seconds were the most critical in his entire plan. Just as he had rehearsed, Zaharie moved his fingers down to the 2 cabin outflow valve switches and pushed them to the open position. On the belly of the aircraft, the 2 valves opened.
I just delivered condoms to a hotel room where I caught my girlfriend sleeping with another guy.
Quinn, what are you doing here?
I didn't say anything when I caught her cheating because I have a secret I must keep, no matter what.
Quinn Talon works at a convenience store to make ends meet when he gets a call to deliver condoms to a room at a nearby hotel.
And make sure you gift wrap them, condom boy.
But when he arrives, he's shocked to see that the woman who opens the door is his girlfriend.
There was a tremendous whoosh inside the cabin as the air came rushing out. Any passengers who had been sleeping were startled awake by the noise and the change in air pressure. Their ears popped and the oxygen masks dropped automatically from the ceiling. The sudden expansion of the air inside the cabin made it significantly colder, adding to the passengers' shock. But before the bewildered passengers even had a chance to put their masks on, the captain yanked the plane violently to the left. In the forward galley, the first officer was slammed to the sidewall by the dramatic turn. He only had seconds to find an oxygen mask in the pandemonium before he would fall unconscious. The captain was holding the plane in a turn so steep that the automated bank angle warning sounded. The plane was at the edge of its capabilities, straining to stay aloft as the captain turned harder and harder. But this wasn't done for dramatic effect. Zaharie needed this turn to be tight. He was right beside Thai airspace, and the last thing he wanted was to burst into an airspace which he hadn't been cleared to enter.
Dude, that is so much fucking plan. Okay, no, hold on. I get it that this might be true. There's so much
because
in there.
Even though he had disabled the transponder, there was still one way that he could be detected. Primary radar. Primary radar is the most basic kind of radar, and it works on the very simple principle of reflectance. A radar dish on the ground sends out a signal which bounces off any objects in the air, including planes and flocks of birds, and is reflected back to the radar dish. Because it just works by bouncing radio waves off an aircraft's skin, there was no way for a pilot to avoid being detected by primary radar. But at the same time, because it's such a simple system, all it can tell is where an object is. It can't tell what it is or how high it is. If Thailand's military spotted an unidentified target infringing upon their airspace, they could well scramble fighter jets to investigate who the mystery intruder was. So, as Zaharie rolled wings level, just over 2 minutes after beginning his turn, he checked his position on his navigation display. To his relief, he had just about managed to avoid Thai airspace. Flight 370 was now headed in the opposite direction, back towards Malaysia. The first part of Zaharie's mission was complete, but a massive challenge still lay ahead of him. He would now have to cross back over the Malaysian peninsula without being intercepted by the Malaysian or Thai Air Force, and he would have to do this without having his plans spoiled by the 238 people behind him. In the main cabin, the passengers were startled and confused. They had put on their oxygen masks and were listening intently to the cabin crew's instructions. The cabin crew told them that there had been a rapid decompression and that they would be descending to a breathable altitude soon. Apart from how cold the cabin had gotten, and the fact that the oxygen masks had dropped, the situation appeared to be under control. Noise levels in the cabin were normal, and now that the sharp turn was finished, the plane was more or less flying steadily. But First Officer Farik knew that this situation was anything but under control. Nowhere in any depressurization checklist does it say that the pilots should turn the plane around. Their first priority, after donning their oxygen masks, is to descend to an altitude where the air is breathable. Whatever was going on up front, it had to be very strange. During the steep turn, Farik had scrambled to sit at one of the cabin crew stations in the forward galley, and he had grabbed an oxygen mask there. Now, he was ready to return to the cockpit to help the captain with the emergency. But, secure on the other side of the impenetrable cockpit door, the captain had other plans. Passenger oxygen masks only provide about 20 minutes of oxygen. The reason for that is that this gives enough time for the pilots to descend to a safe altitude where the air is breathable. This usually takes about 10 minutes. None of the passengers or crew knew it yet, but they would not be descending to a breathable altitude. Their time was running out.
That's crazy that the margin is so small.
First Officer Farik approached the cabin interphone at the forward left door, his heart pounding. Over his shoulder was slung one of the plane's portable oxygen bottles, which he had grabbed from its compartment. He had attached the flexible plastic mask to his face and was breathing heavily from it as he brought his fingers to the handset. There were 15 of these oxygen bottles distributed throughout the cabin, one for each of the flight attendants on a maximum crew flight. There were just 10 cabin crew on board Flight 370, so there was more than enough for each of them. And unlike the passenger oxygen masks, these bottles had 44 minutes of oxygen, more than the crew could possibly need in any conceivable emergency. But this emergency had never been conceived of. Farik was the only person on board breathing from a portable oxygen bottle. The flight attendants had followed their training and had quickly sat down at one of the spare passenger seats or at a flight attendant station and grabbed the 20-minute drop-down mask there. But Farik's situation was different. He was badly needed in the cockpit, and a portable oxygen bottle was the only way to stay conscious while he tried to regain entry. He picked up the handset, dialed the code to call the cockpit door, and put the receiver to his ear. In the cockpit, a message appeared on the captain's central display. Cabin call. if Zahari wanted to open the door,
I'm so tired of playing games, and I don't care what his friends say. I saw him and I walked away, and I don't care what his friends say. I was acting like a bad girl, yeah.
Take a picture of your homework, and it gives you the correct answer and detailed instruction. You can ask it math, chemistry, history, etc. And it even has book summaries all in one app. I cannot recommend it more. School starts soon. Make sure you go download Goth for free now.
all he had to do was rotate the switch on the center pedestal from the auto position to the unlock position. The door would unlock, the light on the entry keypad outside the door would turn green, and Farik would be able to push it open. Farik waited, and watched as the light on the entry keypad continued glowing red. It should only have taken a second for the captain to unlock the door. Why was he not doing this? The first officer figured that he must have been very busy handling whatever emergency this was. He waited for a few moments, and then dialed the cockpit again. The cabin call message appeared on the captain's display, and again he ignored it. This was terrifying. The aircraft had depressurized, and it wasn't descending. Something was going seriously wrong up front in the cockpit. On the other side of the door, Zahari fixed his eyes ahead out his windscreen and onto the orange lights of the seaside town of Kota Baru. This was his entry point for his journey back across his home country, and it was perfect for this mission. His plan was to skirt the border between Thai airspace and Malaysian airspace. This way, when the Malaysian military saw the plane on radar, they would assume that it was being handled by Thai controllers, and likewise, when the Thai military saw the plane, they would assume that it was being handled by Malaysian controllers. And, Zahari figured, even if they did realise that it was Malaysia Flight 370 after seeing it turn back at Agari, they may think that it was making an emergency return to an airport, perhaps Penang's airport, where it appeared to be heading. If this was the case, the flight would be the concern of the civilian controllers, who were surely dealing with the plane. But in reality, Malaysian civilian controllers had handed the plane off to Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam.
Do people not have like a general sky map of where planes are going and where they should be or whatever? If some guy peeps, if something peeps 4 or 5 times back in and out of the fucking airspace, don't they have an idea of oh, maybe something should be there or not be there?
They weren't even thinking about it anymore. Flight 370.
They're still getting the beeps though.
Meanwhile, locked out of the cockpit, First Officer Farik could tell that despite the depressurization, the plane had still not begun to descend. He then had a terrible thought. What if the reason the door wasn't opening was that the captain had
radars get info back from the plane's surface? The skin of the fucking plane sends the data back and they get a beep, bro. Even if they turn it off, the people on the ground's radars, they get it.
Had become incapacitated by the rapid decompression. This would be odd though. After all, donning the oxygen masks was the first item on the checklist, which is completed even before the descent is initiated. And what's more, Captain Zahari regularly taught this scenario to pilots in the airline's flight simulators. He was more qualified than almost anybody to handle such an emergency. How could he simply forget to put on his oxygen mask? But there was no time for Farik to work this out. He needed to get back inside the cockpit. And for that, he had one last option. Cockpit door keypads don't just accept one code. As well as the normal code, there is a special code for the rare event in which the pilots are incapacitated and the cabin crew need to gain access. With this code, the door opens automatically if the pilots haven't responded after 30 seconds. But of course, this emergency code could easily be used by hijackers to gain entry to the cockpit. So, to prevent this, in the cockpit, pilots have the option of turning the door switch to the deny position within 30 seconds of the code being entered. This clever logic allows crews to gain entry to the cockpit in case of a pilot incapacitation, but also gives flight crew the ability to deny entry to hijackers. The first officer hurried over to the keypad and punched in the emergency code. A loud buzzer sounded.
It should take 2 knobs to deny it. Here's my thoughts about this engineering Andy over here. It should take 2 knobs. What if some guy passes out and his head falls and he hits, boom, the knob, and it goes deny. Then what? A one point of failure to start an aircraft this big? Hell no.
In the cockpit. If the captain was incapacitated, the door would automatically open for Farik in just 30 seconds.
You say no shot until
Farik
250
waited
people die in this shit. The fuck?
10 seconds passed, then 20. But those final seconds came and went, and the keypad light remained red. A horrible, sinking feeling came over the first officer. He entered the code once again, this time more carefully, and he waited, counting down the seconds using his watch.
Okay, well,
And yet again, after 30 seconds, the light remained red. This could only mean one thing. On the other side of the cockpit door, the captain had heard the buzzer and had turned the switch to deny. The captain checked his watch. The time was 32 minutes past 1 in the morning, 12 minutes since he had turned his 777 back on itself. About 5 minutes from now, the passengers' oxygen masks would begin to run out. When they did, all 227 of them would become hypoxic. The 10 flight attendants were in much the same boat, still strapped in and waiting for the signal from the captain that they were free to walk about the cabin. The effects of hypoxia are much like the effects of alcohol, with some people becoming euphoric and giddy, others becoming angry, and others still becoming contented and relaxed. Contrary to what many people think, you don't suffocate in a decompression. There is simply a dimming of awareness until the proverbial lights go out. Ironically, the very loss of mental faculties which occurs in hypoxia prevents the realization that it is even happening. In the cockpit, Zahari made a minor adjustment to stay on course as he carefully scanned the skies around him. He was now back over land, zooming across peninsular Malaysia. He had been flying in these skies for decades, day and night, and he knew the lay of the land so well that he could easily identify the various towns en route as he flew overhead.
Last night, I spent a night with him. While I was having a tough day, his gentle touch comforted me. So, I decided...
He knew that at his current speed, he would be able to cross the peninsula in about 20 minutes. As he flew, he had his radio tuned to the Kuala Lumpur air traffic control frequency. He could hear the controller talking to the other planes as normal. At least for now, it was business as usual in Malaysia. At Ho Chi Minh, however, controllers had noticed something odd. The Malaysia Airlines flight from Kuala Lumpur, Flight 370, hadn't made contact. This wasn't overly concerning. Sometimes it takes a few minutes before pilots get in touch. But what was unusual was that the flight wasn't even showing up on radar, despite having been handed over by Lumpur Control almost 20 minutes earlier. The controller tried contacting the flight over the radio. But Ho Chi Minh was far from Zahari's mind at this point. As controllers there counted up the minutes since he was supposed to have made contact, he was counting down the minutes until the passengers and crew would lose consciousness. As for his own oxygen supply, he was at no risk of running out. His supply came from 2 large tanks underneath the cockpit, which had enough oxygen to last 2 pilots 13 hours or 1 pilot 27 hours. These tanks are topped up a few times each year, and luckily for Zahari, or perhaps more than just luckily, this oxygen supply had been topped up that very evening, just before the plane had departed Kuala Lumpur. Take a look at this. It's a scanned copy of the actual tech log from Flight 370. This is one of the last pieces of paper generated by the flight before it left Kuala Lumpur.
Above ground, I understand that the lights are down, but did no camera see it from that distance? There's nobody see anything? Radar's not picking up. Nobody sent. The people said that the radars find him anyway. The radars not pick him up in the sky? I don't get it.
The tech log is the booklet where engineers and pilots note down any faults with the aircraft and whether they need fixing before the plane goes on its next flight. There are 2 things which stick out in this document. First, under defect description, the engineer wrote,
I'm listening. You're not listening. Both the systems for the location are off, okay? Who cares? Who cares? The radars on the fucking ground do their own job, bitch ass. The ground radar pick up the plane location themselves. You don't need to give them anything. They do it themselves on their own. What are you on about?
nil, and nil notes. In other words, no maintenance needed. He also crossed out these fields to show that nothing was needed. But then, sometime later that evening, an engineer did make an entry. Crew oxygen system replenished to 1800 psi. Sometime between when the plane arrived at Kuala Lumpur earlier in the day and when it left again that night as MH370, somebody decided that the pilot's oxygen needed to be topped up. Whether it was Zahari has never been determined. The first officer was beginning to panic. No matter how many times he entered the code, the light remained red. He began to bang his oxygen mask against the cockpit door in a desperate bid to get the captain's attention. Ho Chi Minh Air Traffic Control was growing concerned. Flight 370 had still not turned.
Okay, you're dented. Boom. Explain it. Grounded can't tell what the plane is, if it's a plane at all, or height. If that's when you send the fucking jets. That's when, if that's a fucking problem, you go, yo bro, military, send the fucking fighter jets, bro. What the fuck?
Turned up on radar, and it hadn't answered any of their calls. The controller had tried asking other planes in the area to make radio contact with the plane, including on the international distress frequency.
What the fuck?
These aircraft had reached out, but were met with nothing but silence. After repeated efforts to call the missing aircraft, the controller at Ho Chi Minh telephoned the controller at Kuala Lumpur and told him that he had not been able to make radar contact with Flight 370. He asked whether the flight had turned back to Kuala Lumpur, but the Malaysian controller told him that it hadn't. Fears were now beginning to grow that something terrible had happened to the flight. The controller...
A bird doesn't ping fucking all the way through and bing 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 bing. Bro, one bird doesn't fucking probably just fucking spam the pings from one bird. Bro, it moves around, bitch. It goes around. Birds fucking fly and shit, you fucking loser. Oh, guys, we have in the sky, guys, big flock of birds. Oh yeah, these are my lords, bro. Yeah, that's air traffic control, guys. Yeah, we got the pigeons, guys. Maybe some crows. Yo, dude, what's up? Holy fuck! Would you fucking shut the fuck up, pigeon? Fucking bro, shut the fuck up, dumbass.
Controller at Kuala Lumpur began calling out to Flight 370
I can't watch this shit.
radio
I'm over it.
in case it had returned to his airspace. Zahari was listening out, but remained silent. For the first time that night, he had confirmation that the ground knew his plane was missing. The time was 1:41 in the morning, 20 minutes after the flight had disappeared from radar. Controllers are supposed to report when an aircraft takes more than 5 minutes to make contact. Clearly, the air traffic control system was not at its best tonight.
This area is steeped in miasma and its corruptive residue. I'm the 13th generation High Preceptor of Yunhui Summit, Yishuan. I shall wipe out all evil. Formless air gathers. Corruption is purged. Scatter! Release!
What to do if you drop your phone in water? Never do this. Use water eject. This app uses low-frequency tones to eject water from your speakers, restoring clear sound instantly.
And as Zahari watched out his window, he hoped that the Malaysian military was just as sleepy, because right at that moment, his plane was a blip on their primary radar screens, racing southwest across the peninsula.
Bro, how come this is fucking human controlled? Bro, there should be a fucking ticker, right? That if within 5 minutes, right, they haven't made contact one way or another, at 10 minutes, it sends like a major alert that there's nothing that came from that plane automatically. This should be coded into the system. What the fuck? Bro, the fact that you need a human to go, yo, did these guys, 5 minutes? Bro, it should be automatic at cutoffs. 5, 10, whatever. And at 15, it's like, bro, we're sending the fucking global tanks, bruh. What the fuck?
Zahari could see the lights of Penang.
Send some nukes or some shit, bruh. What the fuck is this?
He would carry out the next step of his plan. Around this time, the passenger oxygen masks began to run out. Gradually, the low chatter which had pervaded the aircraft began to fade. In a matter of minutes, all 227 passengers would be unconscious. And unless pressurization was restored, not long after that, they would suffer irreversible brain damage from oxygen deprivation. And then, death. Flight 370 looked like any other plane as it whispered along high above the Malaysian countryside. But it was now becoming a flying mausoleum for all but one of its occupants.
What a nice plane, though.
First Officer Farouk was growing increasingly desperate. None of his attempts to get back into the cockpit had worked. He had to try something different.
It's a nice plane model. I like planes.
He knew that at this altitude, his mobile phone would have no signal. However, at one of the cabin crew stations, there was a satellite phone. Maybe, he figured, if he could get through to the airline, somebody might be able to help him. Farouk began making his way back to the cabin.
Upwards. It's cool
the clock was ticking. Farouk still had about 20 minutes of oxygen in his tank, but as he walked back through the cabin, he was beginning to feel lightheaded. Even though his mask was providing 100% oxygen, it was not designed to be used at high altitude for prolonged periods of time. By comparison, the captain was wearing a full face mask with a tight seal, and which was specifically designed to deliver oxygen at a positive pressure. This meant that it forced oxygen into his lungs at a rate which ensured that he received as much of it as he needed.
Watch me create a dragon! Splash is sweet. No, not sweet. Brave! It's a dark dragon! Now, let's feed him to make him strong! One appetite! Let's create another! We'll make this one nice and sweet, but also evil and brave! It's a wildebeest dragon! Oh, it's love at first sight! With over 1,000 dragons to collect, what combination will you come up with? Download Dragon City! Play for free!
She killed this for 3!
What are you talking about?
Can't you see me here playing Dunk City Dynasty?
My bad, I thought he was in here shooting free throws.
So everyone just like a comedian today. In this game, I maximize potential and customize some new sneakers for him so he doesn't need your free throws. Plus, this game ends at 11, so that gives me ample time to educate you on Mr. Aura himself.
Who?
Shea Gilgis!
Is he the only one in this game or something?
No, you actually unlock 10 NBA stars for free, and you can unlock more players' gear and diamonds from completing tasks and just logging in.
Am I able to join you?
Are you able to? Yeah, you have the ability through the game, but do I want to play with you though? No.
Come on, just send me a friend request.
Oh yeah, what's your username? Get out!
Dunk City Dynasty.
And with 26 hours of oxygen remaining, he was in no rush to repressurize the plane. By now, he had calculated, all of the passengers, and most, if not all of the crew, had lost consciousness. On his lower central monitor, he could see the first officer through the CCTV, slowly walking away from the door, back into the main cabin.
Hold up. Even at altitude, since you're above land, did nobody's cell phone ping any towers at all or whatever, or some Wi-Fi shit? Did any passenger's cell phones ping anything at all? I don't believe that.
Now at the other end of the Malaysian peninsula, Zahari had reached the next important step in his plan. Ahead of him lay the Indonesian island of Sumatra. As far as Zahari was concerned, this was an impenetrable wall. There were primary radar installations up and down the island, and there was no guarantee that the Indonesians would be as blasé about an unidentified aircraft as the Malaysians had been. If he wanted to escape, he had to avoid Indonesian airspace altogether.
You fucking loser.
So, for the next part of his plan...
You fucking bitch. You loser. Oh my god, I'm pulling the map out. This chat doesn't understand that Earth is covered in satellites and shit. Brother, do you understand that the globe is like in a fucking net of satellites? Hold up, let me show this so you learn it once. Yo, what's the map at? Bruh, hold up. Let me show you this. Guys, I'm not kidding you. The whole... Yes, it's not that I know everything. It's that some of these shit, it's out there. Look. It's loading. Dude, guys, whenever someone's out of the towers, there's other shit. Is there no cell phone at all or no device that pings anything at all? Things just can't go full dark. That's just not a thing. What the fuck? Guys, it doesn't go fully dark. Oh my god, I give up.
He would need to turn to the right and fly up the Strait of Malacca. This way, he would remain inside Malaysian airspace, all the way until he went out of range of primary radar. Far below him, on his right-hand side, was the island of Penang. He had grown up on this island, and now he would fly over it one last time. Zahari twisted the heading select knob on the autopilot, and the aircraft began a slow, sweeping turn to the right. As it did, the first officer held his mobile phone against the passenger window and tried desperately to make a call. His attempts to use the onboard satellite phone had proved fruitless. He didn't know it, but the SATCOM, the satellite communication system, had been disabled by the captain. Farik could see the distinctive island of Penang beneath him, along with its airport, which he had flown to many times. This was the first time since leaving the cockpit that he had a clear idea of where the aircraft was. Normally...
Look at this shit, bro. Bro, look at this shit. Bro, look at this shit. You think that there's not a singular thing on this bitch ass that gets any different from anything? Look at this shit. Bro, it's everywhere, bro. What the fuck? What the fuck? That's just Starlink. Bro, when you have all of them, it's covered. That's just Starlink. Chat, my phone has a little satellite icon when I'm out of range. It's a little satellite. This entire flight, the whole way through. Not a singular thing. There's anything. Bro, no shots. No shots.
Mobile phones cannot get a signal at the speeds and altitudes that airliners fly at.
2014.
But with the plane in a turn, its distance to the cell tower on Penang remained roughly constant. So, for a few short seconds, the first officer's mobile phone, an iPhone 5, connected to the ground station at Penang. But far from being able to make a call, all that Farik got was a brief, fleeting signal bar at the top of his screen. For a few seconds, the cell phone tower registered a signal hit, indicating that the phone was on.
I was right. My cock is about this long.
When the signal bar disappeared,
Look at my hands.
Farik knew that he was truly out of options. Barely able to stand up from hypoxia and exhaustion, he made his way back to the cockpit door. Still in complete control, the captain rolled out on a northwest heading. Some have suggested that this turn around Penang was Zahari bidding a final farewell to his hometown. However, this is unlikely. For one thing, the turn began after the plane had passed the island, so it wasn't really a turn around the island. And besides, the turn was too shallow for the captain to have been able to see the island anyway. Sentimentality had no place in the cockpit of Flight 370. What mattered was the mission, and the mission was far from over. It had been just about 35 minutes since Zahari had depressurized the plane and turned it back over the Malaysian peninsula. He had managed to get across the peninsula without being intercepted by fighter jets, but he still had a significant challenge ahead of him, because Malaysia Airlines had just found out that something was amiss with Flight 370. At Lumpur Radar Control, the supervisor on duty telephoned Malaysia Airlines dispatch centre, telling them that Ho Chi Minh had been unable to contact Flight 370 or see it on radar. The dispatcher at Malaysia Airlines checked the airline's online flight tracking system to locate the flight on the map. It showed Flight 370 to be in Cambodian airspace. Of course, in reality, Flight 370 was nowhere near Cambodia.
Guys, I don't want to be rude,
what the dispatcher
I don't want
did
to be
not
rude.
know.
Everybody is as responsible. Yo, I don't want to fucking hear it, dude. When you have these jobs, if you're not gonna uphold a standard that is safe for people, dude, you shouldn't have that job in the first place. Otherwise, you're responsible. I said it, bro.
This flight tracking system didn't use live information from the aircraft to update its position. Rather, it simply projected its last known position out into the future. Since the plane's last known position was over the South China Sea, heading northeast, that's where the flight tracker showed it to be. So far as Malaysia Airlines was concerned, and now air traffic control authorities too, that's where Flight 370 was. They had no idea that at that very moment, the aircraft was hundreds of kilometers to the southwest, in Malaysian airspace, speeding up the Strait of Malacca. But it still wasn't good news to the airline that one of its flights hadn't checked in with air traffic control. The dispatcher at Malaysia Airlines sent an ACARS text message to the cockpit printer, asking the pilots to contact Ho Chi Minh immediately. But this message didn't...
What message say, bro? Please contact Ho Chi Minh. They complain cannot track you on the radar. Please acknowledge these messages. A text, okay.
Asking the pilots to contact Ho Chi Minh immediately. But this message didn't make it to the cockpit of Flight 370. the captain had stopped the ACARs from being able to communicate with the outside world right after he had removed power from the SATCOM. He was intent on ensuring that not a single clue about the aircraft's status or position made it back to air traffic control or Malaysia Airlines. However, even with the ACARs disabled, there was still one big thorn in Zahari's side. He knew that at Langkawi Airport, in the Malaysian state of Kedah, there was a primary radar station. He also knew that the range of this radar was 200 nautical miles. For every second he spent inside the range of this radar, he risked being discovered and intercepted by fighter jets. Because he couldn't avoid this radar, his strategy for this part of the mission was to blend in. Even at night, plenty of commercial aircraft fly up and down the Strait of Malacca, on their way between Kuala Lumpur and Europe in the Middle East. To anybody looking at the radar that night, Flight 370 would appear as just one more dot, moving serenely up the Strait of Malacca.
Just another dot?
Eerie silence now filled the
That makes no sense. Just another dot? Bro, if you're like the military, just another dot could be a fucking nuke. What the fuck? Yo, there could be a fucking missile. Another dot could be a bomb. What the fuck?
Passenger cabin of the 777.
Makes no sense at all.
It had been almost an hour since the plane was depressurized, and all of the passengers were either unconscious or dead.
Chat, this is your country's air defense system. Guys, there's something that we don't know about in the sky right now. Okay, yo, there's something in the sky, guys. It's just a dot, bruh. Chill out, bruh. It's a dot, man. Yo, it's triggered by pixels, dumbass. What the fuck? What are you doing?
The first officer and any cabin crew who had used portable oxygen bottles with a 44-minute supply had slipped into unconsciousness too. At an altitude of 35,000 feet, even 100% oxygen delivered through a portable oxygen bottle is not enough to stay meaningfully conscious. The only person alive and functioning was the one up in the cockpit. But the situation which he had created was now beginning to have unexpected side effects for his plane, and these had nothing to do with his oxygen supply.
At Les Schwab, our above and beyond service means more hustle, less hassle.
The Planet Fitness Black Card. Access any location, bring a friend anytime, and recover in the Black Card Spa.
Back at Agari, when the captain had cut power to the plane's two main electrical generators, the aircraft's computers had diverted the limited remaining electrical power to only the plane's most essential systems.
It's cold as fucking
But now, almost an hour after this had happened, the plane had begun throwing up warnings saying that the computer room underneath the cockpit, known as the E&E bay, was getting too hot.
Oh.
Its cooling fans were one of the things which had lost power when the main electrical generators were depowered. Zahari didn't fancy finding out what would happen if the computers which powered his cockpit screens and the aircraft's massively complicated systems overheated. According to his checklists, the very least that would happen was that his screens would start going blank. Without them, he would not be able to complete his mission. He had to restore power to the cooling fans. Flight 370 was nearing the edge of Langkawi's primary radar. After this, Zahari would be free, totally unseen by the outside world. He decided that once he was outside of radar range, he would be safe. Only then would he restore full electrical functionality to the plane. Meanwhile, air traffic controllers in Malaysia and Vietnam were becoming increasingly...
He says mission because I think he tried to portray the guy as some I think he's like a cucklord, right? Who wants to not just crash the plane and kill people or whatever. That guy has this aviation master mindset, guys, I'm gonna do this and just disappear and nobody's gonna get caught me, dude, because I'm such knowledgeable in my plane shit. That's what happened.
Confused. Malaysia Airlines operations had told Lumpur Radar Control that Flight 370 was in Cambodian airspace. But, as Vietnamese controllers confirmed, Flight 370 was never supposed to enter Cambodian airspace. It was supposed to fly over Vietnam. And besides, Cambodian controllers couldn't see Flight 370 on their radar. So, where was the flight? Was it over Cambodia or Vietnam? Or was it in the air at all? In truth, all parties involved were being duped by the software Malaysia Airlines used to track flights, which merely projected the plane's last known position out into the future. In the cockpit of Flight 370, Zahari could see on his CCTV display that the first officer was laying slumped against the cockpit door. The one person who stood a chance at thwarting his plans had been eliminated. Just in case there was anybody left, he picked up the microphone and made a call on the intercom, asking for somebody to come and help him in the cockpit. He watched the display carefully. nobody came. At just after 2:20 that night, Flight 370 slipped off the radar.
So until in the new system it appears somewhere else and it gets pinged again, it stays idle in its last position. It's why it kept refreshing on the other guys. That sounds really fucking dumb.
Now, truly, the flight had gone dark. Over 200 people on board were dead, but at this point, an hour after it had turned back at Agari, barely a dozen people in the world even knew that the plane was missing. Zahari had been listening in to air traffic control on his radio set, and there were no signs of fighter jets being scrambled to intercept his plane. As it would turn out, military radar operators wouldn't even notice his flight on their screens until they played back a recording of them the next day. Safely beyond the reach of radar, and secure in the knowledge that he was now the only one left alive on board, Zahari was now able to restore full electrical power to the aircraft. He reached up to the overhead panel and re-energized both the left and right electrical buses. A host of onboard systems sprung back to life as the plane reconfigured electrically. The familiar hum of the fans below the cockpit resumed, and they began cooling the hot computers. Zahari had made it. He had done the impossible and made a Boeing 777 disappear into the night, never to be seen again. It would be morning before anybody began searching for the aircraft, and they would begin by searching the only logical place, the South China Sea, where the flight had disappeared from secondary radar. The sensible conclusion for rescuers to draw, given that the plane had disappeared suddenly and without sending a distress signal, would be that a bomb or catastrophic structural failure had downed the aircraft. Zahari knew that in the days and weeks that followed, it was possible that investigators would review tape recordings of primary radar and see that the plane had turned back at Agari and then turned again at Penang and flown up the Strait of Malacca. But he knew that this is where the trail would end.
Guys, even in 2014, it would be a humanity failure to have a thing this big with that much people disappear from anything anybody could fix on any of these systems and people, it's an everybody failure.
But he knew that this is where the trail would end. If authorities were smart, search and rescue operations would focus on the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal. And this, in Zahari's mind, was the beauty of his plan. Because now, out of radar coverage, he would pull off his final trick. Once he had flown past the island of Sumatra, he would turn to the south and take his 777 deep into the southern Indian Ocean. Nobody could possibly know that he had taken this turn. And even if they somehow did, they wouldn't be able to find him. The Indian Ocean is enormous, and with over 5.5 hours of fuel still on board.
What annoys me even more about this guy is that he could have killed more people if the goal was to kill people. It's almost like he wanted to do an aviation feat, right? And his only way of doing it was if there was civilian casualties. That was almost how it feels. Literally, that's pretty much what this is telling me.
You could go deep into the middle of it.
I'm making an analysis here.
As far as Zahari was concerned, this plan was foolproof. Except, it wasn't. Zahari didn't know it, but the SATCOM, which had been rebooted when he restored power to the main electrical generators, wasn't just a passive system. It wasn't like the radio antenna on board the aircraft, which simply received radio signals and sent them only on request. When he network, this message didn't say where the plane was, or anything else of the sort.
Oh, but it has a range, like you probably triangulate it.
It did contain one piece of information, which, in a week's time, would shock the world. An engineer at Inmarsat would take a look at this log-on request and have an ingenious idea. Attached to the signal sent by the plane was a timestamp saying when it was sent. The satellite also recorded when it had received the signal from the aircraft.
And the time.
So, by comparing these two times, it was possible to determine how long it took the signal to reach the satellite. The engineer who looked at this data realized that because this signal traveled at a known speed, the speed of light, he would be able to determine how far the plane was from the satellite when it sent the signal. He carried out this calculation and got an answer for how far the plane was from the satellite when it sent the log-on request. Simple physics and a spark of insight had shown that at 2:25 a.m. on the morning of March 8th, Flight 370 had been somewhere on this ring. Not inside of this ring, but on it. Everywhere along this ring was the same distance to the satellite.
Guys, Guys, I had to say chat. I'm gonna say chat. Guys, this is Minecraft chords shit. It's same system.
Since the last known position of the plane on primary radar was just 3 minutes beforehand, here, it would be impossible for it to have travelled all the way to Africa, or India, or way south in this time. It had to have been somewhere close to the last known position, on an arc about this length. And so, the first arc was born. Zahari had just given investigators the ultimate